My kindness has landed me into trouble. Will I ever come out of it alive? Oh, the gods of our land, come to my aid, Ugochi said to herself. Ugochi, as usual, went to fetch water from the village river. She spent most of her days by the river, fetching water, washing clothes, and talking to the elders who often gathered by the banks. The river was her sanctuary, a place of peace and quiet, where she could forget the troubles of the world. On this fateful day, Ugochi went to the neighboring village, and she didn't return on time. When she reached home, she realized she didn't have enough water, and decided to rush down to the river. As dusk settled, Ugochi went down to the river to fetch water. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of rain, and the river seemed unusually still, almost too quiet. As she knelt down to fill her pot, a soft sound rippled through the air. Almost like a whisper, curious, Ugochi stood up and looked around. There, partially hidden in the shadows, was a figure submerged in the water. It was no ordinary person. The figure moved gracefully, its long hair swaying like seaweed, and its eyes, glowing like twin moons, locked onto hers. Before she could react, the figure lunged out of the water, grabbing her wrist with an iron grip. "Help me!" A voice barely audible pleaded. "I need to leave this place. I need to escape." Ugochi's heart raced, her breath caught in her throat. The creature before her was no human. Her skin shimmered with iridescent scales, and a tail flickered just below the surface of the river. The figure was a mermaid. Frozen with both fear and fascination, Ugochi hesitated. The mermaid's gaze seemed to pierce through her, as though it could read her very soul. "Please," the mermaid begged, "take me with you. The river has kept me trapped here for years. If you leave me, I'll die." Ugochi, torn between fear and compassion, made the decision to help. With great care, she lifted the mermaid from the river's edge and carried her home, unsure of the consequences, but feeling an overwhelming pull to aid the creature in distress. As Ugochi entered her hut, she laid the mermaid down on the cold stone floor. The mermaid's glow dimmed, and for a moment, Ugo feared she had made a terrible mistake. The air grew thick, and the room seemed to close in around them. "Thank you," the mermaid whispered weakly, her voice strained. "I will reward you. You've saved me. But there's something you need to know. The river doesn't give up its prisoners easily. You're not safe here." Ugochi blinked in confusion. "What do you mean?" The mermaid smiled faintly. "The river, it doesn't forget. It will come for me. And when it does, it will take what it wants." Before she could respond, a strange noise echoed from outside the hut. A low, mournful cry, like the howl of a wind in distress. Ugochi rushed to the door, her heart pounding. The moon hung high in the sky, casting an eerie light on the surrounding woods. As she stepped outside, she saw something in the distance, figures moving, shimmering in the moonlight. The villagers were gathered near the river, but they weren't the people she knew. They were moving in unison, their eyes empty and dark, their bodies stiff and unnatural. The river's pull had begun to stir them, and Ugo realized with a chill that the river's power was not just a force of nature, it was alive. She turned back to the mermaid, who was now sitting up, eyes wide with terror. "I told you," she whispered. "They're coming. The river's guardians. They won't let me go." Ugochi's breath hitched. The mermaid's warning had been true. You have claimed its prisoner, and it would stop at nothing to bring her back. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble, and a cold wind swept through the hut. Ugo ran to the door to see the villagers, no longer themselves, but twisted shadows of their former selves, advancing towards her home, their eyes fixed on the mermaid. Panic surged in Ugochi's chest. She grabbed the pearl the mermaid had given her earlier, feeling its warmth in her palm. "What do I do? How do I stop them?" The mermaid looked at her with an expression of sorrow. "There's no stopping them, but there's still time. You must return me to the river. Only then can the curse be lifted." Ugochi was torn. If she took the mermaid back, would she be able to escape? Could she risk being trapped by the river's power forever? But the eerie procession of villagers was drawing closer, and she knew time was running out. With no other choice, Ugochi seized the mermaid and rushed to the river, the twisted figures of the villagers close behind. As they reached the water's edge, the mermaid whispered urgently, "Throw the pearl into the river. Only the sea can sever the bond."
Ugochi hesitated for a heartbeat before she threw the pearl into the water with all her strength. The moment it hit the surface, the ground beneath her feet shuddered violently. The river roared as if alive, and the villagers stopped, their eyes no longer vacant but filled with a terrible understanding. The mermaid cried out, her body transforming, returning to her true form. Ugochi watched as the water began to churn, a whirlpool forming at the center. The villagers began to retreat, their faces twisted in confusion and fear, as if they too had been freed from the river's curse. As the mermaid disappeared beneath the waves, Ugochi felt a heavy weight lift from her chest. But something was still wrong. The river's power was not gone. It had only been transferred. The world felt different, and Ugochi knew that the river's thirst for souls had not been quenched, only delayed. She looked back at the quiet village, now eerily still, and whispered to herself, "The river will always return." As Ugochi stood at the river's edge, her heart racing, the last echoes of the mermaid's disappearance faded into the night. The villagers had scattered, and the once ominous procession had dissolved, leaving only the quiet lapping of the river against the shore. But something in the air still felt thick, charged with an unease that wouldn't dissipate. She turned back to her village, hoping for the return of peace, but as she neared her hut, she saw it, an unsettling glow coming from within. The same eerie light that had radiated from the mermaid now pulsed from her doorway. Ugochi's pulse quickened. Her feet carried her forward without thought, each step heavier than the last. She pushed open the door, and the sight that greeted her made her blood run cold. The mermaid, her eyes wide and wild, her skin still shimmering, was standing in the middle of her hut. But she wasn't alone. Around her the room seemed to warp, as though the boundaries between the world of the living and the dead were thinning. The shadows on the walls stretched unnaturally, twisting into vague, monstrous shapes. Ugochi's breath caught in her throat as she saw figures, ghostly shapes, slowly taking form around the mermaid. The figures were the villagers, but they weren't the same. Their eyes were hollow, their faces gaunt, their bodies writhing in unnatural jerky movements. The pearl that Ugochi had thrown into the river had done something else, something she hadn't anticipated. "They were never truly free," the mermaid said softly, her voice laced with sorrow and guilt. "You freed me, yes, but in doing so, you unwittingly set the river's curse into motion. These villagers, these souls, belong to the river. They were bound to it, like me." Ugochi's mind spun. "But I thought the river had claimed you for good. Why are they still here?" The mermaid's glowing eyes met hers, filled with a haunting sorrow. "The river does not give up what it has taken. By returning me to the water, you broke the cycle, but you also opened a door. They are the guardians, the spirits of the river's past, and now they are free to claim more souls." Ugochi stumbled back, her heart sinking into her stomach. "What have I done?" She could feel the cold weight of the river's power closing in around her, tightening its grip. The air grew colder still, and Ugochi felt something brush against her skin, icy, like the touch of the deep waters of the river. The shadows in the room seemed to be alive, moving closer, reaching toward her. The spirits, now fully formed, circled her, their hollow eyes filled with hunger. "Now, you are part of the river's legacy," one of the spirits hissed, its voice like dry leaves rustling. "The river claims what it wants. It claimed us. It will claim you." A chill ran through Ugochi as the realization hit her. The river was a force of nature far more powerful than she had ever imagined. It didn't just claim the living, it consumed souls, binding them to its depths forever. Panic surged within her. She couldn't let this be her fate, too. She had to find a way to stop the river's curse from spreading further. Without thinking, Ugochi turned and ran out of the hut, her heart hammering in her chest. She had to get to the river again. Maybe, just maybe, there was another way to break the cycle. But as she reached the water's edge, she saw the whirlpool, the one she had seen before when she had thrown the pearl into the river. This time it was different. The swirling vortex was larger, more menacing. It seemed to be pulling the very stars from the sky, dragging them into the depths. And standing at the edge of the whirlpool was the figure of the mermaid, her eyes no longer filled with gratitude, but with something darker, something cold. Ugochi's pulse raced, and with one last desperate cry, she hurled the shard of the pearl into the river. The moment it touched the water, the whirlpool roared to life, and the sky above her cracked open with thunder. A blinding flash of light engulfed her, and for a moment she thought she might drown in the overwhelming force. When the light faded, she was no longer standing by the river. She found herself in a dark, empty space, surrounded by swirling shadows. She could hear faint whispers, voices from the depths of the river calling her name. And in the distance, she saw a figure. The mermaid. But this time, she wasn't alone. The spirits of the villagers surrounded her, their eyes now glowing with a twisted, malevolent energy. "You did this," the mermaid's voice echoed, distant and mocking. "You freed me, but now you will never leave. The world around." Ugochi was suffocating darkness pressed in from all sides, the shadow swirling like a storm, and the cold whispers of the river's spirits calling her name, their voices now tinged with malice. The figure of the mermaid stood at the center of it all, her eyes gleaming with an unsettling light. No longer the creature of gratitude she once was, she had fully embraced her role as the river's eternal guardian. "Welcome to the river's domain," the mermaid said, her voice like the distant roar of waves crashing against jagged rocks. "This is where lost souls come to rest, where those who are claimed by the river are bound forever. You thought you could escape, Ugochi, but there's no escape from the river's grasp." Ugochi's chest tightened. She could feel the weight of the river pressing on her mind, its voices filling her thoughts, drowning her in despair. The spirits of the villagers circled around her, their hollow eyes watching her every move, their mouths agape, whispering unintelligible words. "You freed me," the mermaid continued, her smile cruel. "But you have freed nothing. You've only freed the river's hunger, and now it's coming for you." Ugochi staggered back, panic rising like a tidal wave. "What do you mean?" Her voice trembled as she looked around at the swirling shadows, at the spirits of the villagers who were no longer just villagers. They were part of the river, and now they were part of her nightmare. The mermaid's laughter echoed in the dark void. "The river does not forgive. The moment you threw that pearl into the water, you sealed your fate. The power that once trapped me is the same power that controls this world. You have unlocked the door, and now the river is awake." The ground beneath Ugochi's feet shifted, and the shadows seemed to rise up, swirling faster and faster until they became a storm of blackness, consuming everything in its path. The spirits of the villagers moved with a purpose now, each one drawn toward her, their eyes blazing with a cold, hungry fire. "No!" Ugochi screamed, but her voice was lost in the chaos. "I didn't mean to. I only wanted to help." But the mermaid was unyielding. "The river does not care for your good intentions. It is a force of nature, of power and greed, and now you are one with it." Suddenly, Ugochi's vision blurred and she felt a sharp pull, as though the very air was ripping her apart. Her body was lifted from the ground, spinning in place as the river's power surged through her, overwhelming her senses. She tried to scream, but no sound came. The river's grip was suffocating, dragging her deeper into the void. Then, everything went still. A strange calmness washed over her, and she found herself in a place unlike any she had seen before. The darkness was gone, replaced by a pale, eerie light that bathed the endless expanse before her. The ground was soft beneath her feet, but there was no sky, no horizon, just an endless, surreal world of water and mist. She was standing on a shore, the water at her feet, now calm, but its depths seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. The air was thick with the scent of salt and decay, as though the place she stood was the very heart of the river. In the distance, she could see a figure emerging from the mist, a tall, cloaked figure with glowing eyes. As it came closer, Ugochi's breath caught in her throat. It was a man, but not a man as she knew one. His features were sharp and inhuman, his skin the color of dark stone, his eyes glowing a deep, piercing blue. He stopped before her, his gaze heavy and knowing. "Welcome to the realm of the river," the figure said, his voice like the sound of water crashing over rocks. "I am the keeper of the depths. You are here because you crossed a line that few have dared to cross. You tampered with the river's soul." Ugochi could hardly breathe as the weight of his words settled over her. "I didn't mean to," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I just wanted to save the mermaid. I didn't understand what I was doing." The keeper's gaze softened, but only slightly. "The river does not care for your intentions. It has a mind of its own. It has claimed you, just as it has claimed so many before you." "But there has to be a way out," Ugochi said, desperation creeping into her voice. "I can't stay here. Please. There must be a way to undo it." The keeper's expression was unreadable. He seemed to study her for a long moment, and then slowly he spoke again. "There is one way. But it is not a path you can take lightly. You must go to the heart of the river, the place where all souls are bound. Only there can you break the bond that ties you to its power. But be warned, the journey is not for the faint of heart. The river will test you. It will try to break you, just as it has broken others." Ugoch's heart pounded in her chest. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "I have to make this right." The keeper nodded slowly. "Then you must travel the depths, face the river's trials, and confront the very heart of its power. If you succeed, you will be freed. If you fail, you will be lost forever." With that, the keeper raised his hand, and the world around Ugochi began to shift once more. The mist thickened, and the water began to churn violently. The spirits of the villagers appeared again, their hollow eyes fixed on her, but now they seemed to hold something more, something dangerous. They were not just spirits anymore. They were part of the river's trials, sent to test her. "I won't fail," Ugochi whispered to herself, as the path ahead grew darker and more treacherous. Part 4. The keeper raised his hand, and the mist around her grew thicker. The ground beneath her feet began to tremble. The air felt colder. Ugochi had to take the first step. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began walking. As she moved forward, the mist parted, revealing a dark path leading into the deep river. The water was calm on the surface, but Ugochi could feel something was wrong. The river was watching her, waiting for her to make a mistake. After walking for what felt like hours, she reached a small island in the middle of the river. The island was covered in strange, glowing plants. At the center of the island was a tall stone building, covered in vines and moss. This was the place the keeper had warned her about, the heart of the river. As she approached the building, she saw something move in the water. She froze, her heart skipping a beat. From the shadows, figures began to rise. Villagers, their eyes empty and dark, staring at her with cold, unfeeling eyes. "Go back, Ugochi," one of them said, its voice hollow. "You can't stop the river. It will always claim you." The villagers moved toward her, their faces twisted with anger and sorrow. Ugochi took a step back, but she remembered the keeper's words. She had to face the river's trials. She had to be strong. With a deep breath, she stepped forward, walking past the villagers. They tried to grab her, but she refused to stop. She had come this far, and she wouldn't give up now. As she reached the stone building, the door opened on its own. Inside, there was a huge pool of water, glowing with an eerie blue light. At the center of the pool was a stone pedestal. On it was a small, shining object. Ugochi knew what she had to do. She stepped into the water, feeling the coldness seep into her skin. The moment she touched the water, the river's power surged, pushing her back. The spirits of the villagers surrounded her, their faces twisted in pain. "You cannot take what the river has claimed," one spirit whispered. "You belong to the river now." Ugochi ignored them. She had to reach the pedestal. She waded through the water, her legs heavy as though the river was trying to pull her under. But she fought through it, moving forward, determined to reach the pedestal. When she finally reached it, she saw what was on the stone, a glowing pearl. It was the same pearl she had thrown into the river earlier, the one that had started all of this. Ugochi reached out and took the pearl in her hand. The moment her fingers touched it, the river roared. The water around her began to swirl, and the spirits of the villagers screamed. The ground shook as if the entire world was about to collapse. But she held on to the pearl tightly. She closed her eyes and whispered, "I am not afraid. I will not let the river control me." The water began to calm. The spirits faded, and the swirling stopped. Ugochi opened her eyes. The heart of the river had started to change. The blue light dimmed, and the once angry river seemed to grow still. She had done it. She had faced the river's trials and won. She felt the grip of the river loosen, and the weight on her chest lifted. The river had let go of its hold on her. She turned to leave, but the keeper of the depths was there, watching her with a silent gaze. "You have done what many could not," he said quietly. "The river will no longer claim you, but remember, its power is never truly gone. It will always be there, waiting for the next soul to test." Ugochi nodded, feeling both relief and fear. She had won this battle, but she knew the river would always be there, just beyond the edge of her world. She stepped away from the heart of the river, the glow fading behind her, and made her way back to her village. But as she walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that the river wasn't done with her just yet.